The fire started at 2 in the morning, which was the hour Clem would later understand had been chosen deliberately, not for the dark, which would have argued for midnight, but for the depth of sleep, which peaks in the hour before the body begins its slow return to the day. She woke to the smell before the light reached her. Smoke first, then the orange pulse through the bedroom window, and she was out of the bed and through the front door in the time it takes a sleeping person to become a running one. The barn was fully involved. The house was beginning at the east wall, where the dry timber met the porch overhang, and the fire there was still young enough to outrun if she moved immediately, which she did. She got the horses out. Both of them, the grey mare and the young roan, panicked and difficult, and finally moving through the paddock gate into the east pasture. She got the payment box from the kitchen drawer, her first conscious decision, the one that told her later how much of her was still working even in the shock of it, and the coat from the peg by the door, and she cleared the porch as the east wall took the fire completely. She stood in the yard in the cold, and the coat and the payment box, and watched her house burn. There were 3 of them. She saw them on the ridge above the property, 3 figures on horseback, visible against the fire-lit sky, watching, not hiding, watching in the particular open way of men who do not expect consequences. The one in the centre wore a long, dark riding coat and had a red kerchief at his throat, visible even at that distance in the firelight. He sat his horse with the loose ease of a man whose night had gone as planned. She looked at them. The one in the centre looked back. Then the 3 of them turned their horses and rode north along the ridge and were gone into the dark. She spent the rest of the night at the Greer place, her nearest neighbours, a mile down the valley road. Ada Greer put her in the spare room and brought coffee and asked no questions until morning, which was the specific form of kindness that Clem would remember longest. In the morning she went back to the property. The house was a foundation and ash. The barn was the same, the stone walls standing, the timber gone, the smell of it in the cold morning air, with a completeness that made the whole valley feel scorched. The horses were in the east pasture, unhurt, standing at the far fence line, as if distance from the smell was the only thing they wanted. She walked through the foundation. She found the iron stove, the stone chimney, the iron bed frame. She found nothing that told her why. She had been ranching alone for 2 years, since her husband Lou had died of a fever that had taken him in 8 days, without enough warning to properly say goodbye. The land was paid. The cattle were manageable. She had no debts, no disputes, no enemies that she could name. She was not blocking anyone's road or sitting on anyone's water. She was simply a woman alone on 12 acres in a valley, which was apparently enough. She was standing at the burned edge of the east wall when she heard the horse on the upper road. The upper road came off the ridge from the north, the same ridge the 3 men had ridden along in the firelight. She turned before the horse was visible, and kept turned as it came down through the scrub pine and onto the lower track. One rider, a lean, angular man on a dark bay, moving at a careful walk, his hands visible and his eyes reading the burned site before they settled on her. He had grey-black cropped hair and dark grey eyes that were very still, and a canvas work coat with 2 buttons missing and a mended tear at the left shoulder. He rode with the slight separateness of a man who keeps himself at a considered distance from situations until he understands them. He stopped at the fence line and looked at the foundation and the ash, and then at her. "I saw the smoke last night," he said. "I'm on the Petrie lease, 2 miles north. I would have come sooner, but I didn't know if whoever did this was still on the road." She looked at him. His stillness was not the stillness of a man suppressing something. It was the specific calm of someone who has made a practice of not wasting motion or expression on things that do not require them. "It was 3 men," she said. "They watched from the ridge. They didn't hide." His dark grey eyes moved to the ridge line briefly. "I know," he said. She waited. "I've seen the same 3 men twice in the past 2 weeks, on the ridge road and once on the north track near the creek crossing. The one with the red kerchief His name is Dross Penter. He runs a small outfit that moves through ranges where land is thinly held and the law is thin to match. He paused. They burn or threaten. Then someone buys the abandoned property cheap before the ash is cold. Who buys it? Whoever hired them. He looked at her directly. I don't know that part yet. Clem looked at the foundation. The iron bed frame stood in the ash where her bedroom had been. The stove stood in the kitchen corner. The chimney stood above all of it, tall and absurd and completely intact, which was its own kind of statement about what survives and what does not. You came to tell me this, she said. Yes. Why? The slight hesitation before his answer was not evasion. It was the habit of a man who answers questions with the correct words rather than the fast ones. Because you're next to my lease, he said, and because I know what Penter does when he's not stopped. He looked at the chimney, then at her, and because it needed to be said to someone, and you're the one it matters to. His name was Hale. He gave it without surname, which she did not press. He helped her clear the foundation that afternoon, not because she asked, she had not asked anything, but because he assessed what needed doing, and began doing it with the same considered economy he brought to everything. He worked without talking much, which suited her, and when he did speak, it was to the practical point. At the end of the afternoon, he told her what he knew about Penter. Dross Penter had been moving through the northern range for 3 years. He operated with 2 permanent men and picked up others locally. He was not disorganized, he was patient and deliberate, and he chose targets that were isolated and underprotected and unlikely to generate a coordinated response. A lone woman on a burned ranch with no house and no immediate neighbors was the ideal Penter situation. The expectation was that she would leave within a week. He'll come back, Hale said. I know. Not to burn again, to offer to buy. He looked at her, at a number that treats the burned property as already abandoned. And if I don't sell, he'll make it difficult to rebuild, block supply wagons, scatter the cattle, make the cost of staying higher than the cost of going. A pause. It works most of the time because most people in this situation are alone. Clem looked at the chimney standing in the ash. She was not a woman who made large statements about resolve. She was a woman who had gotten the horses out and the payment box, and cleared the porch in the time it took the east wall to catch fully, and she had done those things without deciding to. They had simply been what the situation required. I'm not leaving, she said. Hale looked at her with the dark grey, still eyes. I didn't think you were, he said. I'm trying to tell you what you're going to need. What came next would cost him more than he'd planned when he rode down the ridge that morning. What she needed, he said, was 3 things. A record of Penter's presence, witnesses, dates, locations, establishing the pattern. A contact at the territorial marshal's office who understood organized range intimidation rather than individual crime. And time, enough of it to build the record before Penter returned with an offer. The first she could help with. She had seen Penter's face clearly in the firelight. She could describe every detail. The red kerchief, the dark coat, the loose ease in the saddle, the way he had watched her watch him. The second was Hale's problem. He said it plainly. He knew a deputy marshal named Croft, who operated out of the territorial office, and who had been building a file on organized range intimidation for 2 years. He knew this because he had contributed to that file once, 18 months ago, regarding a different property in a different county. He did not explain more than that. Clem did not ask more than that. The third, time, was the problem. Penter moved fast once the burning was done. He would return within 4 days with an offer. They had until then to reach Croft, establish the pattern, and have something official enough that Penter's next move would be made in front of a witness who mattered. Croft is 60 miles, Hale said. Then someone needs to ride tonight. He looked at her. I'll go, she said. I know what I saw. I can describe Penter. I know the dates and the pattern you've described. She paused. You know Croft. If you write a letter I can carry, he'll take it seriously. Hale was quiet. She had come to understand, in an afternoon of working alongside him, that his quiet was not absence. It was the active consideration that preceded his actual answers. She waited. If I write that letter, he said, Croft will know where I am. Is that a problem? The stillness before this answer was longer than the others. I've been careful, he said, about who knows where I am, for 3 years. He looked at the chimney. Croft is trustworthy, but a letter is a record. He paused. It ends the careful part. Clem looked at him. The late afternoon light was going orange on the hills beyond the property, and the cold was settling in from the north, and the man beside her was telling her, in the particular oblique language of someone not accustomed to explaining himself, that helping her would cost him the anonymity he had spent 3 years maintaining. You don't have to, she said. I know that. She did not push it. She turned back to the work, the clearing, the stacking, the making of something ordered from the ash. He worked beside her without speaking for a long time. Then, I'll write the letter. She looked at him. He was looking at the chimney. It's the right thing, he said. The careful part was getting old anyway. The trouble was that Penta was not going to wait for letters to arrive. He came on the 3rd day. Not with the 2 men this time. Alone, which was the move Hale had anticipated and warned her about. A man alone with an offer looks like a reasonable conversation. A man alone with an offer after burning your house is something else. Clem was at the Greer place when Penta rode up. She had gone for tools, and Ada Greer had pressed a meal on her, and the hour had gone later than intended. Hale was at the property. He had been sleeping in the lean-to he'd put up in the east pasture, and working the site during the day, which was not something she had asked him to do, and which he had offered without ceremony. She was coming back up the valley road when she saw Penta's horse at the gate. She did not hurry. She came up the road at the same pace and turned into the gate and tied her horse at the post and walked across the yard to where Hale was standing 10 feet from Penta, in the specific arrangement of 2 men who have reached a pause in a conversation that was never going to be pleasant. Penta's brown-black eyes moved to her with the fast calculation she had seen in the firelight. The red kerchief was at his throat. The long, dark riding coat was trail-filthy. He had the loose ease of a man who had done this many times and expected it to go the way it had gone before. Mrs. Aldrin, he said, using a name that was not hers, which told her he had asked around and gotten it wrong, which was useful. Clem Voss, she said, a brief adjustment in his expression. Mrs. Voss, I heard about your misfortune. I'd like to make you an offer on the property, fair market given the current condition. The current condition being that you burned it, she said. The fast-moving eyes went very still for a moment. Then the laugh came, early, before anything was funny, gone before it finished. That's a serious claim, Mrs. Voss. It is, she said. Deputy Marshal Croft appears to agree with it. He rode in this morning. She paused. He's at the county sheriff's office now, with your file. This was true. Croft had arrived that morning, not in response to Hale's letter, which had not yet reached him, but because 2 other ranchers in the northern county had filed complaints in the past week, and Croft had been moving toward Cutter's Creek already. Hale's letter, when it arrived, would simply add to what was already building. Penta looked at her. He looked at Hale. He looked at the chimney standing in the ash of her house, with the particular permanence of something that had refused to fall. You've got nothing on me, he said, but the easy confidence had adjusted, not gone, but recalibrated, the exit calculating eyes now genuinely calculating. I've got your face in firelight at 2 a.m, Clem said, and a description that matches you in 3 counties, and a deputy marshal who's been waiting 2 years for someone who saw your face clearly and was still standing to describe it. She looked at him with the brown, steady eyes, her wide cheekboned face, her mouth flat in the way it went when she was managing something large. "I saw you clearly, Mr. Penter. You watched me watch you. That was a mistake." The silence lasted the length of a cold wind moving across the burned site and lifting a thin curl of old ash from the foundation. Penter gathered his reins. He looked at her once more, the fast, dark eyes doing their final calculation, and then he turned his horse and rode back down the valley road. He did not come back. Croft arrested Penter and one of his men 4 days later, 12 miles north, on the combined testimony of 4 ranchers, including Clem and the file Hale had been contributing to for 18 months, without knowing Croft already had his name in it. At the kitchen table, the temporary one Hale had built from salvaged timber and set up under the canvas lean-to, Clem sat with the arrest notice Croft had brought and read it twice. She thought about Lou, the way she often did in the quiet moments. He had been a practical man who believed that most problems yielded to consistent effort, applied in the right direction, and he had been right about that often enough that she had adopted it as a working principle. She thought he would have found Hale comprehensible, the economy of him, the precision, the way he worked without needing to be told what needed doing. He would have liked the chimney still standing, she thought. He built it to last, and it had. The framing went up over the following 2 weeks. Hale had a way with timber, the patience to set each piece level and true before moving to the next, the understanding that speed in framing trades cost against itself. Clem worked beside him, and the Greers came on the weekends, and 2 other valley ranchers who had watched the ash and felt the specific unease of people who understand that what happens to one isolated property can happen to theirs. On the morning the ridge beam went in, the beam that ran the length of the house and from which everything else would hang, Clem stood in the open frame and looked up through it at the sky, which was the particular pale, clear blue of a late October morning that has decided to be generous. The smell of fresh-cut pine was everywhere. It was the smell of something being built rather than burned, and it was different in a way she could not entirely describe, except that it required breathing in rather than breathing away from. Hale came to stand beside her in the open frame. He looked up at the ridge beam. He looked at the chimney, still standing at the east end, incorporated now into the new walls, as if the house had been designed around it, which in a practical sense it had been. "Level," he said. "Yes," she said. They stood in the open frame in the smell of the pine and the cold morning light for a long moment. She had not asked him to stay past the arrest. He had not announced that he was staying. He had simply continued to be there, in the lean-to, at the site, at the temporary table in the morning, with the same considered economy he brought to everything, and she had continued to work alongside him without discussing the arrangement, because some arrangements do not require discussion to be real. "You're named in Croft's file now," she said. "I know. 3 years of careful." "It was time," he said. "The careful was for something. This was the something." She looked at him with the warm brown eyes, her face in the morning light with its wide cheekbones and its straight-mouthed composure, and she said nothing for a moment, because the things that needed saying had been said in the working, in the weeks of it, in the way 2 people who have done something hard together understand things about each other that words arrive at slowly. "The south room needs framing this afternoon," she said. "I know," he said. "I was going to start after coffee." She went to get the coffee. On the morning the roof went on, new timber framing stood complete against a pale cold sky, the ridge beam running true, the rafters set even, the chimney rising from the east wall as it always had. The smell of fresh-cut pine moved in the cold air across the valley, and the creek ran clear in the lower pasture, and the grey mare stood at the east fence with the roan beside her, their breath making small, steady clouds in the cold. The valley road below was empty and quiet. The ridge above it was empty too. The house was not finished, but it was standing, which was the part that mattered first.